Shalom Havrim, James Trim here, and today I want to do a video that's something of a follow-up on the last video that we did. The last video was about the original Jewish followers of Yeshua, the Nazarenes, and their relationship to the oral law. And when we were discussing that, one of the things that came up is the that there were two major types of oral law from Sinai, and the rulings that were made, the decrees of the elders, and that the Torah says that these decrees of the elders are Torah. Deuteronomy chapter 17 verse 11 refers to their decrees as Torah. And you want to go back and watch the last video we did. There's a lot more detail on that. So one of the other things we talked about is how that even with these decrees of the elders, from a Nazarene perspective, there are two categories. There are decrees of the elders that came before the time of Yeshua, and decrees of the elders that came after the time of Yeshua. And that from a Nazarene perspective, the decrees of the elders that came before the time of Yeshua would have much more weight than those that came after the time of Yeshua, where those that came after the time of Yeshua, the position I believe we as Nazarenes should be taking to those decrees would be to be scrutinizing the logic and the arguments back and forth that are preserved in the Mishnah and the Talmuds and the Tosefta and the Halakhic Midrashim to determine whether the logic is valid and whether we should follow that ruling, and to analyze that ruling and the logic thereof also in light of the halakhic teachings of Yeshua and the halakhic principles that Yeshua gave us. And we've talked about that in previous videos. We may talk about it more in the future. Today I want to talk about the halakhic authority, the hierarchy, if you will, the assembly of emissaries and elders that Yeshua established. But before we get going here, I need to ask everybody to please donate to support this work and these unique videos. We depend entirely on you for our support. And by the way, I want to thank the young man out there who sent $5. And he wanted to support this work, so he sent $5. Any gift is appreciated. No gift is too small, and every gift helps. And we are asking you to please support this work with your gifts. And if you can give large amounts, then we would greatly appreciate that. If you can give only $5, we appreciate that. Even like I said, the young man that sent $5 just yesterday. So donate to support this work, and we especially need your donations right now. We're at the middle of the month, and donations have been kind of low, and funds are drying up rapidly. And we really need your help right now financially. Okay. I also want to ask people to like this video. Please subscribe to this channel. That helps get our subscriber numbers up. We're up at 3,050 some odd, and we're trying to get up to 3,500. But we're up over 3,000 now, and that's great, but we need your help to build those numbers. Click the notification bell so that you'll get notified when new videos come out. And please share your comments in the comments section and let us know what you think of our material. And don't be afraid to participate in discussions that are taking place in the comments section. All of these things are things that the YouTube algorithm looks at to decide which videos to recommend to new viewers. And we want to be recommended to new viewers. And another way you can do that directly is to share these videos on your social media, Facebook, Twitter, whatever, any social media. Share these videos with your friends, and that'll also expose us to more new viewers. Also, there's two things you'll need, or they'll be helpful for this video. One is your scriptures, and two is that there is a handout for the extra biblical citations that we have, and in a PDF file, and there's a link to that PDF file in the video comments. And I forgot to tell you how to donate. It's real nice to tell you how to donate, but hey, it's helpful to know how. There is a donate link in the video description, or you can send donations by PayPal to donations@wnae.org. All right, now let's get started. First, I want to turn to Matthew chapter 16, and let's start in verse 16 or 17. Yeshua answered and said to him, "Happy are you, Shimon ben Yonah, for this was not revealed to flesh and blood, but to you when it was revealed to you by my Father which is in heaven. I tell you," verse 18, "I tell you that you are Kepha, and upon this rock," and that's a word play because Kepha is Aramaic for rock, "I will build my assembly, and the gates of Tachti will not prevail against you." Tachti is not just Sheol, but the lowest parts of Sheol. In fact, Tachti is the place where the fallen angels of the book of Enoch were bound. Okay. "And to you will I give the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you will prohibit on earth has been prohibited in heaven, or is prohibited in heaven, and whatever you permit on earth is permitted in heaven." Okay, so let's start with back to verse 18. It says, "Upon this rock I will build my assembly," or in the King James Version, "I will build my church," which the Roman Catholic Church likes to make a big deal of this passage, that St. Peter established, or was the first pope supposedly of the Roman Catholic Church, which was built upon him. That's not what this word assembly means here, and I'm going to prove it here in just a moment, but we'll put a pin there for the moment, that this word assembly does not refer to the so-called church at all. Okay, and then verse 19, and then the rest of verse 18, "And the gates of Tachti will not prevail against you." And some apologists, some evangelical Christian apologists use this passage to prove that there would not be an apostasy. And that's absolutely false, because the word assembly or church in the KJV is not the general assembly, the body of Messiah that's being referred to there. And again, I will show you that as we move along. But in fact, I will give you I will tell you now, we'll put a pin in there, and then I'll go prove it here in just a minute. The assembly that's being spoken of there is the assembly of judges, the assembly of elders. It's essentially the Sanhedrin. So Yeshua is not saying that he's going to establish a new religion, a church, a new Christian religion, and that it won't apostatize, or that he is establishing a new religion that Peter will be the first pope of. He's not saying that at all. Okay, what he is saying is that he will build his assembly, and this assembly, in context, we're going to find out, in Matthew, elsewhere in Matthew here, that this is the assembly of judges. This is not the general assembly body of Messiah that's being spoken of. So what he is saying is that he's going to build an assembly of judges, a hierarchy, if you will, a Sanhedrin. And that this Sanhedrin that he's going to build, their decisions won't be apostate, is what he's telling us. And in verse 19, he says, I will give the keys of the kingdom of heaven. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. So he's giving the keys were sold. There was an office in the Sanhedrin called the Av Beit Din. The president of the Sanhedrin was called the Nasi. And then the vice president, if you will, and sergeant of arms, kind of wrapped into one, was called the Av Beit Din. And because the Av Beit Din was like the sergeant of arms, the Av Beit Din was the one that actually presented cases to the Sanhedrin. And the Av Beit Din, Av means father of the Beit Din. A Beit Din is a house of judgment, literally. So the Av Beit Din, then, since he presented cases, he was in control of who had the floor and who was allowed to speak, and even who was allowed in to the essentially the courtroom, if you will. And so he was said to hold the keys. Now you understand what it means that Kepha had the keys, was being given the keys, because he was going to serve in the office of Av Beit Din. Not Pope, by the way, Av Beit Din. And then it says, whatever you, or we read the King James Version, for example, in many translations, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Those are idiomatic terms, bind and loose, that are used in Hebrew and in Aramaic in the halakhic literature, the Mishnah, the Talmuds, etc., to refer to prohibiting and permitting activities. In other words, an issue would be brought to the Sanhedrin as to whether a certain thing was permitted on the Sabbath. Was it okay to scratch my head on the Sabbath? Okay. And the court would hear the case and make a determination, and if it was determined that I can't scratch my head on the Sabbath, then the court, it would be said that the ruling is isur, it's prohibited, bound from. So we'd be bound from scratching our head on the Shabbat. And if the Sanhedrin determined that it was permitted to scratch our head on the Shabbat, we would say it was loosed, or it was mature, it was permitted. Okay, mature. Okay, so in context, then, this is referring to the activities of a halachic body of judges, the Sanhedrin. Their ability, the Av Beit Din holding the keys, and their ability, their power of that assembly to bind and loose, to prohibit or permit certain activities halachically. Okay, so now let's look at Matthew chapter 18. Matthew chapter 18, starting in verse 15. And if your brother sins against you, go and reprove him between you and him alone. And if he will hear you, you have won your brother. But if he will not hear you, take to yourself one witness or two. And at the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, every word may be established. Quoting from Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 15 in the Torah. Very important. We're going to go back and look at that for context. Remember when Paul was teaching the Bereans, it says that the Bereans were more noble than anyone else because they were looking in the scriptures to see if what Paul said was true. Well, what scriptures did the Bereans have? The Tanakh. The New Testament hadn't been written yet, okay? So Paul's response was that they were more noble than anyone else because they were checking and understanding what he was saying in context of what the Tanakh said. He didn't say, oh, forget that. Wait till I write the book of Ephesians. Okay, no. All right, so we're going to look here in a minute and look at the context that Yeshua is using, and we're going to assume that Yeshua wasn't some kind of a shyster and that he was quoting passages of the Tanakh and the Torah in context. So we're going to go look at that context to see what Yeshua was saying. I know that's a novel concept for a lot of people. So then we're going to look, we continue here in verse 17, and if he will not hear him, then hear them, speak to him in the assembly, or in the KJV, the church. These are the two instances of the word church in the KJV of the book of Matthew, and I think in fact in all the Gospels. And one of them is chapter 16 that we just looked at, and it's a church that has the power to, or it's an assembly that has the power to bind and loose in Matthew 16. And what do you know? We're going to find out the same thing here. And if he will not hear him, speak it to him in the assembly. But if he neglects to hear him in the assembly, let him be to you as a goy, or Gentile, or a transgressor. In other words, excommunicate him from the Jewish community. Verse 18, truly I tell you, all that you will prohibit on earth has been prohibited in heaven also. In other words, all that you bind on earth is bound in heaven, and all that you loose on earth is loosed in heaven also. Again, I tell you, if two of you will agree on earth as touching anything they will ask, it will be done for them of my Father which is in heaven. Now, verse 19 is actually referring back to verse 16, which is actually quoting from Deuteronomy 19:15. So when verse 19 says, again, I tell you, again, it means that I'm repeating something, right? It's the same thing I've been talking about, not something completely different. Again, I tell you, if two of you will agree on earth as touching anything they will ask, it will be done for them of my Father which is in heaven. So that means if two believers, at least two believers, get together and they agree that God's going to give me $1 million, that I'm going to name it and claim it and receive this $1 million because two of us agreed. No, that's not what it means. That's completely out of context garbage, okay? What it means here is that if, under Jewish law, if you take these two witnesses and you question them and their testimony agrees, okay, because they would question them separate from each other, so they couldn't hear each other's testimony. If their testimony agreed, you could take that testimony. It established the matter. You could take that testimony as if it had come from Elohim himself. And that's what verse 19 is telling you. It's all about the court. Okay? The whole context here is all about the court. And we're going to prove that yet another way here in a minute. And no doubt that this is the same assembly that we saw in chapter 16, because both assemblies have this power to bind and loose. And the one in chapter 16 has to do with Kepha having the keys. And that has to do with the office of Beit Din. But also, remember, verse 16 here says, at the mouth of two or three witnesses, every word may be established. Okay, which is why that it says, but if he will not hear you, take to yourself one witness or two. Okay, so if you go to somebody and they won't hear you about this issue that you have with them, then you, before you bring them to the court, you bring the witnesses and say, look, I can make a case. I've got the witnesses. Let's not take this to court. And so Let's go see what Deuteronomy 19:15, which is what is being quoted here, actually says. So in Deuteronomy chapter 19, starting in verse 15, one witness shall not rise up against a man for any iniquity or for any sin in any sin that he sins. At the mouth of two witnesses or at the mouth of three witnesses shall the matter be established. That's what Yeshua is quoting here, right? So let's find out what he's saying in context. Verse 16, if a false witness rise up against any man to testify against him that which is wrong, then both the men between whom the controversy is shall stand before Yahweh, before the priests, and before the judges, which shall be in those days. So there's the context. What assembly are we talking about? The judges which shall be in those days, according to Deuteronomy verse 19, verse 17. That's the assembly Yeshua is talking about in context in Matthew 18, not the general assembly, the body of Messiah, not some kind of new religion church, not some church that was the first pope of which was Peter, not some new evangelical Christian church that the gates of hell won't prevail over and therefore will never apostatize. All of that is complete out of context garbage, and in fact it is essentially blasphemous, because it is saying, once you actually look up the passages to see what Yeshua is saying in context, and look at Devarim chapter 19 verse 15 in context to see what he is saying, then you can see that these people are essentially saying that Yeshua is twisting the scriptures out of context. And obviously he's not. So if he quotes Deuteronomy 19:15, he's quoting it in context. If he's quoting it in context, the assembly is the judges that shall be in those days. And if the assembly is the judges that shall be in those days, that is perfectly in keeping with the idea of a assembly that has the power to bind and loose. And it's perfectly in keeping with the idea of Kifa being the Av Beit Din and having the keys. Okay? All of this makes perfect sense from a Jewish perspective. If we get rid of all this 2,000 years of Gentile Christian misinterpretation. Okay, now let's turn to Acts 15. And we did a whole video several weeks ago on what's taking place in Acts 15 as far as the case that's being presented and the resolution. And I don't want to get into that here, because we've done that before and we don't have time to cover that all. What I do want to say here is that the context of Acts chapter 15 is that a halakhic issue has come up at Antioch. The issue is whether a Gentile has to be circumcised to be saved. And the resolution is that's determined after hearing the case is that he does not have to be circumcised to be saved, and that he can go to the synagogue and learn the Torah while keeping some minimum purity regulations, and before ultimately being circumcised and becoming a proselyte. Okay. Again, I established all of that well, documented it in a previous video on Acts 15. We're not doing that now. What I want to show you here is that in Acts 15 we have a Nazarene Sanhedrin meeting, and in verse 2 it tells us, when therefore Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and disputation with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain other of them should go to Jerusalem and to the apostles and elders about this question. That's the KJV. In other words, the emissaries and elders. Okay, well, we know who the emissaries were, the 12 emissaries. But who were the elders? Well, again, we'll put a pin here to a certain extent because we're going to move forward to prove this more and more as we go along, but we have to unfold things in the order in which we arrive to them. And so the emissaries, we know there were 12 emissaries, but they're not just the emissaries here. There's also a group called the elders. And I'm going to submit to you that these elders were a body of 70, and we're going to show that as we move along here. But in Luke chapter 10, at the very beginning of the chapter, verse 1, after these things, the Lord appointed over 70 also, and sent them 2 and 2 before his face into every city and place whither he himself would come. He appointed 70. Now, why did he appoint 70? Well, I think that this is where he appoints the 70 elders. And we're going to find out about the 70 elders as we move forward. What's really interesting about chapter 10, verse 1, is that the KJV has 70, and many of the Alexandrian and Byzantine type texts have 70, but typically the Western type texts, the Old Syriac, the Codex D, Greek Codex D, and the Old Latin have 72. And the Old Syriac says, which is an Old Aramaic text, says that not that they were appointed 70 also and sent them. It says that they were appointed from his Talmudim. So there's no exclusion here from the 12. The 12 could be part of them. That's important. As we move along, you'll see why. So it was 72 or 70, but probably 72 in the oldest, best sources that we have. Now, I did a whole written teaching on why the Western type text is the oldest, most original text, and I'll put a link to that in the video description. Okay? So now we're going to turn to our handouts, because now we're going to get to the extra biblical sources and see how all these things play out and how they tie in with the Jewish sources that we have in the rabbinic literature, particularly the Talmud and the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the first page of our handout is titled The Great Nazarene Sanhedrin, and it's where we're actually going to talk about the Sanhedrin in general, but we're going to see how this perfectly fits with a council of an assembly of emissaries and elders, two different groups. So a group of 70 elders that Yeshua appoints in Luke chapter 10. And we can also see why there's this confusion between 70 and 72 in the manuscripts. So reading from the Babylonian Talmud 17a, it says, "Our rabbis taught, but there remained 2 men in the camp. Some say their names remained in the urn, for when the Holy One, blessed be he, said to Moshe, 'Gather unto me 70 of the elders of Israel,' Moshe said to himself, 'How shall I do it? If I choose 6 out of each tribe, there will be 2 more. In other words, because 12 isn't a multiple of 70, it's a multiple of 72. How shall I do it? If I choose 6 out of each tribe, there will be 2 more than the required number. If I select 5, 10 will be wanting. If so, the other hand, I choose 6 out of one and 5 of the other, I shall cause jealousy among the tribes.'" In other words, 70 is not divisible by 12. What am I going to do? What did he do? He selected 6 men out of each tribe and brought 72 slips, on 70 of which he wrote the word elder. leaving the other 2 blank. He then mixed them all up, tossed them in an urn, and said to them, "Come and draw your slips." To each who drew a slip bearing the word elder, he said, "Heaven has already consecrated you." And to him who drew a blank, he said, "Heaven has rejected you. What can I do?" Okay. Now, it's very interesting, by the way, we'll talk about this more in a minute, that when the 12 emissaries, after Yeshua's death, there were 11. Judas had hung himself on a tree. And so there were only 11, and they had to choose a replacement. And they chose 2 potential replacements, according to the book of Acts, and cast lots for who that replacement was going to be. So the final decision was up to Elohim, essentially. Okay. I'd say random chance, but there's no such thing as random. So, now turning to another passage in the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 88b, we get an in-depth look at how the ancient Sanhedrin system was set up. It has been taught, Rabbi Yosef said, originally there were not many disputes in Israel, but one Beit Din of 71 members sat in the hall of hewn stones, and 2 courts of 23 sat at the entrance of the Temple Mount, and 1 at the door of the Temple Court, and the other courts of 23 sat in all Jewish cities. Okay, so a court of 23 in Judaism is called a Sanhedrin Katon, a small Sanhedrin, and a little Sanhedrin. And then there was only one Sanhedrin Gadol, great Sanhedrin, and of 70, and it met in the chamber of hewn stone. Now, when I say there was only one, there was actually more than one body in the first century claiming to be the Sanhedrin, or calling itself the Sanhedrin. There was another body, the one that convicted Yeshua, by the way, that was a political Sanhedrin that contained both Pharisees and Sadducees, and was headed by the high priest, who was a fake high priest who purchased the priesthood from the Roman government. Caiaphas at that particular time. That was a different Sanhedrin from the body of 70 that was led by Hillel and Hillel's descendants. Okay, so if a matter of inquiry arose, the local Beit Din was consulted. If they had a tradition, in other words, if they had a tradition, in other words, what we would call a precedence, or common law, thereon they stated it. If not, they went to the nearest Beit Din. If they had a tradition thereon, they stated it. If not, they went to the Beit Din situated at the entrance of the Temple Mount. If they had a tradition, they stated it. If not, they went to the one situated at the entrance of the court. And he who differed from his colleagues declared, "Thus have I expounded, and thus have my colleagues expounded. Thus have I taught, and thus have they taught." If they had a tradition thereon, they stated it. And if not, they all proceeded to the hall of hewn stones, where they, the great Sanhedrin, sat from the morning Tamid into the evening Tamid. On Sabbaths and festivals, they sat within the hall. The question was then put before them. If they had a tradition thereon, they stated it. If not, they took a vote. If the majority voted unclean, they declared it so. If clean, they ruled even so. Or if a different kind of issue, or a different way of putting it, if they said something was permitted, then it was loosed. If they said it was not permitted, it was bound. They had the power to bind and loose. But when the disciples of Shammai and Hillel, who the disciples had insufficiently studied, increased in number, disputes multiplied in Israel, and the Torah became as 2 Torahs. From there, the hall of hewn stone documents were written and sent to all Israel, appointing men of wisdom and humility, who were esteemed by their fellow men as local judges. From there, the local Beit Din, they were promoted to the Beit Din of the Temple Mount, thence the court, and thence to the Hall of Hewn Stones. Okay, so that gives you the background of the Pharisaic Sanhedrin. But I've always said, and we've done, I think we've done videos, we may do a video on this specific topic, but we've done videos that touched on this very strongly. The original followers of Yeshua were an amalgamation of people that came from a Pharisaic background and from an Essene background. Now, the Essenes had split off from the Pharisees over halakhic issues about which they disagreed well before the time of Yeshua. And in fact, the Essenes considered the Pharisees sons of darkness. And contrary to what you may hear in rabbinic Judaism, not all of Judaism recognized the Pharisaic Sanhedrin as the final body. First of all, the Sadducees didn't, and certainly the Essenes didn't. The Essenes weren't going to go to the sons of darkness to tell them how to walk. They considered themselves to be the sons of light. They had their own halakhic body, and so we're going to read about their halakhic body here. They had a body of 12 individuals corresponding to the 12 tribes. And so Yeshua had 12 emissaries that correspond with the 12 tribes, as we see in Revelation chapter 21, verses 12 through 14. And they were simply known as the 12 in 1 Corinthians 15:5. The office of emissary in Hebrew is shaliach, meaning envoy, legate, emissary, deputy, or agent. It's commonly translated apostle, but that's got a lot in the King James Version, etc. But that's got a lot of theological Christian baggage attached to it that we want to strip away. The office of shaliach is in Judaism refers to one who is empowered to act legally on behalf of the person or body which dispatched him. A shaliach acts with the sort of power of attorney for whom he represents. The 12 would have been an administrative body which was empowered to act on behalf of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh and his assembly in logistical matters. Not only might they deal in practical matters such as buying and selling property, but they also acted as traveling representatives of the assembly, acting as prophets, teachers, proclaimers, and shepherds. As such, they also oversaw matters of doctrine in the community, just as the assembly of elders oversaw matters of halakha. So if it was more theological, I believe that the 12 had authority, and if it was a logistical halakhic matter, then that would be a matter handled by the 70, and if both were at stake, I think both bodies would have met, like we see in Acts 15, a joint meeting. Okay, so let's look at, this was a body that had a parallel in the Essene community, known as the Etzat HaYachad, the Assembly of the Yachad. And this is here in our handout. In the Assembly of the Union, this is from the Manual of Discipline, 1QS, column 8, starting in line 1. In the Assembly of the Union, or the Assembly of the Yachad, there shall be 12 men and 3 priests, who are blameless in the light of all that has been revealed from the whole Torah, so as to work truth, righteousness, justice, loving kindness, and humility one with another. They are to preserve emunah, faith in the land, with self-control and a broken spirit. When such men as these come to be in Israel, then shall the assembly of the union truly be established as an eternal planting. Now, this is an astounding parallel to the 12 emissaries. And not only was the Etzat HaYachad of the Essenes, the Qumran community and the Dead Sea Scrolls, 12 men and 3 priests. It wasn't clear from the context or from the grammar whether the 3 men, the 3 priests, were 3 of the 12 or in addition to the 12. But I think there were 3 of the 12 because of the overlay with the Nazarenes. Because it's very clear when you study the Ketuvim Netzarim that not only did Yeshua have 12 emissaries, but 3 of those emissaries, Kepha, Yaakov, and Yochanan, were often singled out by Yeshua for special attention, taken aside by Yeshua for special instruction. We see this in Matthew chapter 17, verse 1, at the Mount of Transfiguration. We see it in Matthew chapter 26, verse 37, in Mark chapter 5, verse 37, etc. Peter, James, and John, Kepha, Yaakov, and Yochanan. These 3 are called by Paul 3 pillars in Galatians chapter 2, verse 9. So the 3 of the assembly of 12 emissaries served as 3 pillars. Now, according to the Mishnah, in Mishnah Sanhedrin, chapter 1, section 3, and the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 13b, the laying on of hands to give shmicha, or authority to teach, was given by a court of 3 judges. And there was 3 types of courts. There was a court of 70, the Great Sanhedrin. There was the court of 23, which was a Sanhedrin Katon. And then there was a court of 3, at least 3. It could be more than 3, but of at least 3 judges, we simply refer to as a Beit Din. Okay. So I think that there is a parallel here with this idea. Paul writes in Galatians 2:9 about this, about these 3 pillars that he seem to be pillars. I think that they gave him the right hand of fellowship, and shmicha means to lay hands on someone. So it could be literally, the right hand of fellowship could literally mean that they laid hands on Shaul, and that these 3 pillars had that special authority. Okay, I've given you a whole lot to chew on, but want to boil it down and distill it. I believe that Yeshua established for the Nazarenes, he established a council of 12 emissaries, 3 of whom served as a higher office of the 12 of 3 pillars. In addition to these 12 emissaries, he established a council of 70 elders, and or 7 Nazarene Sanhedrin. One thing I forgot to mention, in Acts chapter 15, we see Kepha acting as the Av Beit Din. He's presenting the case. We see Yaakov Hatzadik acting as the Nasi. He is the president. He delivers the sentence, and he presides over the court. And you can see that if you read Acts chapter 15 very carefully, that Yaakov Hatzadik is the Nasi. He is presiding, and that Kepha is the Av Beit Din. He is presenting the case. Okay. I know this has been a lot of material to digest, but the original followers of Yeshua had a complex bicameral government. My way of thinking is that there were 12 emissaries and a council of 70, and among the 12 emissaries there were 3 pillars. These bodies met together in complex matters that involve both theology and halakha, as we see in Acts chapter 15. But typically speaking, I think that the 12 dealt with matters of theology, and that the 70 dealt with matters of halakha. So once again, as we wrap up here, I want to remind everybody to please donate to support this work of the restoration of the ancient sect of Nazarene Judaism. And you can do that by clicking on the donate link in the video description. Also, you can do it by sending donations by PayPal to donations@wnae.org. Finances are very low right now. We really do need your financial support in the next 24 to 48 hours in coming days, where things are very tight. So please consider helping us out, and please like this video. Please subscribe to this channel. Click that little bell icon so that you'll get notifications of future videos. Let us know what you think of this video in the comments, and participate in discussions that take place in the comments section. And all of these things help us get recommended by YouTube's algorithm to new viewers. And also, please share this video with your friends on social media like Facebook, Twitter, etc. Until next time, everybody, shalom.